Along both sides of the main channel span of Florida's Sunshine Skyway Bridge, enormous concrete cylinders rise out of Tampa Bay, packed with rock and set deep into the seabed, standing guard around the bridge's central piers like a ring of fortress walls. Most drivers crossing the bridge today barely notice them. They are called dolphins, and they exist for one reason: to make absolutely certain that what happened here on the morning of May 9th, 1980 can never happen again. If you are new here, subscribe before you keep going, because this channel exists to walk through roads exactly like this one. The ones most people will never drive, but that quietly decide who comes home and who does not. At 7:33 that morning, a freighter called the Summit Venture struck one of the support piers of the original Sunshine Skyway Bridge, and 1,200 feet of steel and concrete fell 150 feet into Tampa Bay, taking 6 cars, a pickup truck, and a Greyhound bus down with it. 35 people died. This video is not about a bridge that was neglected. It is almost the opposite: a disaster that happened so publicly and taught the engineering world so much that its lessons became the legal standard every new bridge in America has been required to follow for more than 3 decades. And it is about what happens when a lesson that thorough still does not reach every bridge built before it was written. To understand what happened, you first have to understand the bridge itself. The original Sunshine Skyway opened in 1954 with 2 lanes spanning 15 miles across the mouth of Tampa Bay to connect St. Petersburg on the Pinellas Peninsula to Bradenton on the mainland side. As traffic grew, a second parallel span opened in 1971, so that by 1980, the crossing consisted of 2 separate bridges running side by side, one carrying northbound traffic and the other southbound, each supported by piers driven into the floor of the bay to let commercial ships pass beneath on their way to the port of Tampa. On the morning of May 9, 1980, the Summit Venture, an empty bulk carrier bound for the port to load 28,000 tons of phosphate, was being guided through the narrow shipping channel by harbor pilot John Larrow, accompanied by a co-pilot trainee named Bruce Atkins. The weather turned quickly. A squall descended over the bay with rain and wind gusts later estimated at 60 to 70 miles an hour, cutting visibility to almost nothing and disabling the ship's radar entirely. Larrow ordered the engines into full reverse and had the crew drop anchor, but there was not enough distance left to stop a 20,000-ton vessel drifting sideways in that kind of wind. The ship struck a secondary pier supporting the southbound span, a pier that, unlike the bridge's reinforced main support, had not been designed to withstand the impact of a large vessel. 1,200 feet of roadway gave way almost instantly. 6 cars, a pickup truck, and a Greyhound bus, full of rush-hour commuters and travelers, went over the broken edge and fell 150 feet into the bay below. Only one person who went into the water survived. Wesley McIntyre, a truck driver and mechanic from Gulfport, had just crested the top of the span in his 1974 Ford pickup and was already descending the far slope when the roadway beneath him disappeared. His truck was flung against the black hull of the Summit Venture, ricocheted off, and dropped into the bay. McIntyre, a former Navy swimmer, managed to free himself underwater and reach the surface, where the freighter's own crew pulled him out. He walked away with a head wound and water in his lungs, sued the ship's owner, and settled for $175,000 4 years later. He died of bone cancer in 1989, and for the rest of his life, he reportedly returned to the bridge every year on the anniversary of the collapse to remember the 35 people who did not make it out of the water with him. Recovering those 35 took days. Divers from Florida's Department of Transportation, including a bridge inspector named Robert Rayola, worked alongside student volunteers from the Eckerd College Search and Rescue Team. In the days that followed, searching the wreckage and the submerged vehicles for victims still trapped inside. The last body was not recovered until May 14th, 5 days after the collapse. Rayola has said publicly, decades later, that the recovery effort haunted him for most of his life. and that for nearly 40 years afterward, he and many others who worked those waters said almost nothing about what they saw. John Laro, the harbor pilot who had been guiding the ship, spent the rest of his life carrying the weight of that morning as well, even after both a state grand jury and a United States Coast Guard investigation cleared him of wrongdoing, and even after a federal administrative law judge ruled in December of 1980 that he had acted reasonably given the storm. A National Transportation Safety Board investigation later assigned partial responsibility to Laro, while also concluding that the sudden radar-disabling squall was a decisive factor no amount of skill could have fully overcome. Laro was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 8 months after returning to work and died of the disease in 2002. His own attorney later called him the disaster's 36th victim, someone who never stopped blaming himself for a storm that arrived, by every official account, too fast and too violently for any pilot to outmaneuver. What makes this story different from almost every other video in this format is what happened next, at the level of policy rather than at the level of any one person's blame. The National Transportation Safety Board's official report on the Summit Venture disaster, published the following year, became one of the most influential documents in the history of American bridge engineering. In 1983, a National Research Council committee studying ship and barge collisions with bridges used the Skyway disaster as its central case study. In 1984, Louisiana's Transportation Department issued the country's first formal vessel collision design criteria for bridge piers, built directly on lessons drawn from Tampa Bay. By 1988, 11 states working together with the Federal Highway Administration had commissioned a full set of national guidelines for protecting bridges from ship strikes. Those guidelines were formally adopted in 1990 and 1991 by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, the body that writes the design code every new bridge built in the United States is legally required to follow. In other words, the deaths of 35 people in Tampa Bay directly rewrote the rulebook for how every bridge over navigable water in America has been designed for more than 3 decades since. The rebuilt Sunshine Skyway Bridge, which opened in 1987 at a cost of $224 million, became the physical proof of concept for those new rules. Engineers elevated the roadway, widened the shipping channel by 400 feet to give vessels more room to correct course in bad weather, and surrounded the main piers with 2 separate layers of protection, including the concrete and rock dolphins that now ring the channel supports and extend all the way down to the bay floor. According to Florida's Department of Transportation, those dolphins are specifically designed to deflect an out-of-control vessel away from the piers before it can strike them directly, absorbing and redirecting the kind of force that brought down the original bridge in under a minute. For decades, the Sunshine Skyway stood mostly as a historical case study, a lesson written into engineering textbooks and design manuals, rather than a warning anyone expected to see repeated. That changed on March 26, 2024, when a container ship called the Dali lost power and struck a support pier of Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge, collapsing the span into the Patapsco River and killing 6 construction workers who had been repairing potholes on the bridge overnight. The Key Bridge had opened in 1977, 3 years before the Skyway disaster, and more than a decade before the AASHTO vessel collision guidelines existed, and it had never been retrofitted with dolphins or an equivalent protective system. Engineers who study bridge safety noted publicly, in the days after the Baltimore collapse, that the Sunshine Skyway had effectively set the national standard for exactly the kind of protection the Key Bridge lacked, and that the difference between the 2 outcomes came down almost entirely to which decade a bridge happened to be built in, rather than which state built it or how much traffic it carried. The vessel that struck the Key Bridge was roughly 4 times the size of the Summit Venture, but engineering analysts who reviewed the Baltimore collapse concluded that a modern system of dolphins and protective islands, the same category of defense installed at the Skyway nearly 40 years earlier, would very likely have kept the ship from ever reaching the pier at all. The Sunshine Skyway itself has not been allowed to simply rest on its own reputation as the industry's model bridge. In the wake of the Baltimore disaster, the National Transportation Safety Board published a list of 68 bridges across the country, structures built before the 1991 vessel collision standards took effect, that it recommended undergo formal vulnerability assessments to determine whether they could withstand a strike from the size of cargo ships now moving through American waterways. The current Sunshine Skyway Bridge, despite being purpose-built after the standard existed and widely credited as the safest bridge of its kind in the country, appeared on that list as well. A reminder that even a structure designed specifically to prevent a repeat of 1980 is still being asked to prove again that it can hold. That is the real shape of this story, and it does not resolve into a simple villain. No agency hid the danger of ship strikes on bridges after 1980. If anything, the opposite happened. The lesson was studied more thoroughly, published more widely, and codified into law more completely than almost any other transportation safety failure in American history. The gap that remains is not a gap in knowledge. It is a gap in how quickly a known solution reaches every structure that could benefit from it, especially structures built in the years before that solution existed. When retrofitting means tearing into a bridge that is still carrying tens of thousands of vehicles across it every single day. 35 people paid for the version of that lesson that arrived too late for the Sunshine Skyway to learn before it was built the first time. 6 more people in Baltimore paid, in 2024, for the version of that lesson that still had not reached every bridge built before 1991. Drive across the Sunshine Skyway today, and the dolphins are easy to miss. Low gray shapes sitting quietly in blue water beneath a bridge that looks, from the driver's seat, like nothing more than a long and beautiful crossing over Tampa Bay. They are not decoration. They are the physical record of exactly how much the deaths of 35 commuters and travelers on an ordinary Friday morning changed the rules for every bridge built after them, and a quiet standing reminder that the rules only protect the bridges built to follow them.